Phil Kerpen is the president of American Commitment and joins me now to discuss. Phil, as always, you are a repository of information. We always appreciate your time. I just have to get your thoughts on this situation in California, because it's so the children who are the least affected, and this is the claim that they are not is unsupported, but they're the least affected by the virus. They have to get the vaccinations, but teachers and faculty do not. That doesn't sound like science to me.
Well, it's pretty remarkable, and I think you gave the exact correct explanation. Teachers union are very powerful politically, and if they've got members that don't want the vaccine for whatever reason, the governor's not going to stand up to them. But children don't have much choice, especially if you note in his announcement, he said public and private school students, it's going to be mandatory. And so the only choice, if you don't want it, I guess, would be to homeschool or to move out of the state. It's very heavy-handed. He did say upon approval, not upon authorization. And so assuming that they do an emergency authorization, which I find odd in itself, given that there doesn't seem to be much of an emergency for children, but it does seem likely the FDA is going to do that. That would not apparently trigger this mandate. It would be the full approval, which probably isn't going to come for some time. But still, it's a pretty clear message from the governor that they're going to require this of children, kind of regardless of what the cost-benefit analysis is, and including if people have, family histories or any specific reason that they wouldn't want their children, that wouldn't make sense for their kids to get. He's going to say, tough. Essentially,
the way that they've handled this has just done so much damage, and just not being forthright with people, not saying, we didn't anticipate these mutations to happen as quickly as they did. We don't have any genetic sequencing for any other kind of injection that would handle this particular variant. So this is where we are. This is what make your own best decision. They didn't do that. It blows my mind.
Thing is they do have Delta specific boosters from all the major manufacturers that are in trials, but for whatever reason, they've shown almost no urgency, and they've nothing like President Trump's warp speed approach in trying to get those, tested and proven safe and ready quickly. Instead, they're just saying, essentially take another dose of last year's vaccine, which I find very strange.
Yeah, you don't do that with flu shot.
Right.
That's just so okay. So one of the other things that everyone's starting to discuss now is we're going into fall. We're in pumpkin spice season. We're full on into that. And to their credit, the New York Times every now and then they have some genuinely good reporting. Of course, that's often balanced by horrible reporting. But they were discussing some of the hospitalization rates and transmissions for southern states that have really taken a beating in the press and by this administration in the past year. And interesting how Florida was just at the bottom of this list and still decreasing. In fact, all of these, and you've noted this too, a number of southern states, warmer areas, their rates are starting to decrease. Is that, and it seems oversimplified almost to say that it is just something as basic as seasonal changes. Now that it's getting cooler out, people in southern states are going to go outside. It's getting colder up north, so they might be more inclined to spend time indoors. Is it really just as basic as that?
Well, we've got a pretty clear seasonal pattern now. We've seen it through a couple of years. The southern areas definitely get it earlier. Last year, they got it in basically June and July. This year, they got it in kind of August and September. And then the northern states get it later. And it's not the exact same days that they got it last year, but the sequence is kind of the same. And so it's fair to assume that there's some sort of seasonal factor in play, whether that's something related to something related to the amount of solar radiation that there is, or whether it's something to do with the way that the weather affects the transmission dynamics of the virus itself, or whether it's just human behavior, the point that you just made, which is the outdoor season in the South is not the summer because it's too hot to be outside, and that may be why they have more transmission indoors than in the North. I don't think we really know the relative contribution of the kind of factors that cause the seasonal pattern, but we do know that the seasonal pattern is real and exists, and to a certain extent, it reflects the seasonal pattern that we've seen with influenza and other respiratory viruses in the past. In fact, there's a very famous scientist named Edgar Hope Simpson, who did a study in the 1970s that looked at the flu transmission globally every single year, and he sort of put together what the seasonal patterns looked like, and he found that there was a very different pattern in the northern temperate region than there was in sort of the tropical and subtropical region, and he thought the dividing line was at about 30 degrees north. And if you look at what we've seen with COVID, it looks like the dividing line is about 37 degrees north. So maybe the world has changed. Maybe COVID's a little different in terms of its geography than flu. But it's really interesting to me that the observations from many decades ago with flu seem to have relevance to what we're seeing with COVID now in terms of the difference in the seasonality according to latitude.
Yeah, and that, of course, the seasonality. I mean, at this point, it's endemic. I'm not quite sure if I feel like our health agencies know this, but wouldn't it be so much more helpful if they just admitted it to everybody and just so that we could maybe better perhaps plan or strategize?
Well, I think the southern states have generally reached endemicity, and most of them are in the high 60s to say even the low 70s, the percentage of the population that's ever had it. So they're pretty well up there in terms of those numbers. Some of the northern states may have one more epidemic left, unfortunately, Dana.
Oh, wow.
We may have another epidemic wave here over the next few months in some of these northern states. But I do think that if that happens, that may be it for them, or it may not. It really depends, I think, on how far into the population they are, and that varies by area. And so it's not going to be endemic everywhere all at once. It's going to depend on sort of reaching whatever the number is in the population. We don't really know what that is. I will say that India and Nepal had something very, very interesting happen that has not happened in the rest of the world yet, which is that influenza is back. And I think that might be sort of nature's best indicator of when you really are through the epidemic phase with COVID, is when it seeds ground back to our old friend influenza, and that comes back. We're not seeing that yet in the U.S. I think we may see it in some areas this year. We may not see it all. I don't know. But I think that's when we'll really know that the epidemic is over.